Recording in progress.
To begin, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians of the lands on which I work, the Pambalong clan of the Awabakal people. We come together from lands far and wide that have been cared for by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people for over 60,000 years. So let us pay our respects to elders past, present and future. And something that I like to think about when I do acknowledgement to country is the tragedy of the loss of hundreds of Indigenous languages in our country, and how fantastic it is that all of you are working to keep other languages alive in Australia. May the work that we all do keep cultural and linguistic diversity alive in Australia. So the purpose of this workshop is to offer some administrative and management support to community language schools, to your committees, to the people that are working to manage your schools, and maybe give some background to teachers and some support to teachers, and maybe even parents are interested to understand more about what this program is and the funding and the terms and conditions and requirements of being a part of this New South Wales Community Languages Schools program, to support committees in achieving best practice when running a new community language school, or for a new committee running a community language school that's been around perhaps for many, many years. Yesterday, we went through the contents on the left-hand side of the screen, and today we'll be addressing the dot points on the right side. So looking at host schools and how we can work with host schools and nurture good relationships with our host schools, the community use agreement, safety, security and looking after property, communicating, some suggestions for good protocols and practice, incident reporting, and then looking at a teaching program and how that's a really important part of running a community language school. I thought I'd begin with a little bit of some fun facts about community languages schools. I'll just get this out of the way. There we go. So the community languages schools first started in Australia, in South Australia. A group of German migrants began a school in 1839. So we've had a community language school program in Australia for a really long time. You're a part of something old and solid. The federal government began funding community language schools in 1981. So it was a long time before the government actually got behind this program by giving some funding to schools. But then they gave that responsibility over to the states in 1992. And as you know, our program is funded by the New South Wales state government. And enrolments in community language schools have more than doubled since 1981. In 2019, there was more than 37,500 community language students learning language and culture in New South Wales, 62 different languages, and more than 3,000 volunteer teachers turning up, giving their time to keep this program going, which is amazing and wonderful. Some schools have hundreds of students. There's some really big community language schools, and then some are tiny and have only 15, or even some have fewer than 15 in regional areas. And I know we've got some schools here in the Hunter region where students travel for like an hour, more than an hour each way to be a part of their community language school. And the school is quite small, but it's a really important part of community and supporting those students in their diverse cultural identity. And our program in New South Wales and the other states of Australia are one of the few in the world that receive government funding. Most community language schools in other countries in the world don't receive any funding from the government. So it's great that our New South Wales government supports the program as they do. Oops. Okay, so over to the first point today, host schools. The The host schools, this is a relationship that you have that really needs to be nurtured. Can you think of something that you do to nurture your relationship with your host school? Maybe you could type it in the chat now if you've got an idea, something that you do to look after that relationship that you have with the host school. A part of the New South Wales government's support for this program is offering free use of New South Wales state school facilities to the community language schools. So they are free. It's something that the government is covering the cost for. But it's kind of, we call them host schools because they're like a host, and it is a privilege to be able to use their facilities for free. And it's really varied how welcoming these host schools can be. And it can be really hard to find a host school. The 2 kilometre rule aside, even if you find yourself in an area where there's no other school with teaching the same language within 2 kilometres, a lot of schools are not willing to be hosts, and then some seem to do so begrudgingly. It's not like they're really happy to be doing this. So the relationship that you're working with can start off in a really different place. Some schools, some host schools will give the community language school access to beautiful classrooms, lots of different classrooms, use of the interactive smart board, and other schools are only given use of the hall, and it's cold in winter, and they might not even, I know one school was given use of the hall, but there was not even a whiteboard to write on. So, and that host school thought that it was very generous to be giving the community language school free use of the hall. So it's a real spectrum of generosity and the level of welcoming that these schools give. I'm just going to have a quick look in the chat and see if there's any suggestions there for things people are doing to look after the relationship with the host school. Yeah, Monica said regular communication with the school. That's so true. When you think about any relationship that you have, like with your partner, for example, regular communication is really important to continue to understand where each of you is at. And also I think that communicating regularly with the host school can give them a sense of the meaning and the value of what they're contributing when they hear from you and when they hear from what they're supporting. Regular meetings, Harmony Day, yeah, cooperation and contributing to the Harmony Day celebrations. Parents Committee President, looking after and supporting the school management. Yeah, so getting involved in the running of the day school as well and being present in that way. They're all great suggestions there for how you can support your relationship with the host school. I'll now go back to sharing my presentation. So something to be careful about is make sure that you only use the rooms and the equipment that are included in your contract with the host school, that is in the community use agreement. And you could think about these things as well, taking the rubbish with you, keys, cleaning, locking the gates and the alarms, who the contact person is at the community, at the host school, so that you can maintain that communication. And then there's communication. So I encourage you to really look after that relationship with the host school. So the community use agreement, what is a community use agreement? I am going to show you a community use agreement. Here we go. So here is an example of a community use agreement. And if you're using a public school, a primary school or a high school, you must have one of these community use agreements. It's a contract between you and the school. And typically it will last for 12 months. And if you don't have a community use agreement, the school can kick you out without any notice at any time. So make sure you've got this community use agreement and make sure that it's up to date and you approach the school if they don't approach you each year. You can see there's a note here about the equipment. I mentioned earlier, only use the equipment that the community use agreement states that you're allowed to use. This has got the agreed usage, so the day that you're there and the times that you'll be there. And just a note there on the times, you know that as a part of this program, you're funded to deliver 2 hours of language tuition per week. So if you wanted to run another class after those 2 hours of language classes, like a martial arts class or an art class or an IT class, anything at all, the expectation is that you would pay for that time that you're using the school. You only get the 2 hours of free use. If you want to be there for longer than that, apart from pack up and set up and pack up, then the idea is that you would pay for that additional time to run any kind of extra class. So I can send you a link to this form. It's really important that you familiarise yourself with the terms and the conditions of the community use agreement, because it is a legal document and you are bound by these terms once you, as you see down here at the bottom, you sign your name to this form. So it's a legal contract that you have with the school. So you should understand what you're agreeing to when you sign this community use agreement. And you'll see that there's some items in here about child protection as well, that if you become aware of any child abuse, that you will notify the host school as well of what's going on. Some information here about the keys. The keys are actually really expensive, really expensive. I've heard thousands of dollars to recut keys if you lose them, because they have to recut everybody's keys typically. So very important.
I think they are like $1,500.
Yeah. So really important that you treat those keys like they're worth $1,500 when they're handed over to you.
Sorry, Cara, just a question regarding the 2 hours use.
Yes.
Is that you mean in the afternoon? What about Saturday? Is it also 2 hours?
Any time of the week, you can use the school facilities for 2 hours at no charge. 2 hours per class. So if you have multiple classes, I know some schools will have a class on a Monday and a class on a Friday, 2 hours on Monday, 2 hours on Friday, different classes, then you could have them for 4 hours in total to run the 2 separate classes. But it's just for teaching the language and culture. I know of a school in Sydney.
Just my question, if I have like 4 different language levels, and I'm teaching them only on Saturday, how many hours per class do I have?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Zachariah. So if you stagger them, so you had the first class and then the second class and then the third class, so it was 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours, I believe that the school would give you the use of them for 6 hours. But it would be one classroom, I imagine, or unless you had multiple classes in the multiple levels. Is that how you have it?
Yeah, I have maybe 6 classes for 4 hours. So each class will have like 4 hours.
Yeah, that's
Arabic
fine.
And the culture.
Yeah, that's fine. The issue is when schools start running like calligraphy and dance and things that are certainly a part of cultural education, but they're not actually a part of, well, actually, this is quite complicated, because you could teach calligraphy and you could teach dance as a part of your language instruction, as long as they were used as a medium for teaching language. But if you're running a dance class and the instruction's all in English, so it's purely cultural, and students are asked to pay extra money for this dance class, then that should not be subsidised by the government. Is that clear? It's a little bit murky. Okay, so you've got your community use agreement, you've read that, you're familiar with the terms, you understand what's included in the community use agreement. Make sure that everyone knows who's got the copy of the community use agreement, so that if you have a new committee that comes in, you're able to, as the handover, explain to the new committee members that this is the community use agreement and it needs to be renewed each year, so that it's something that everybody knows about. As I've said, familiarise yourself with the terms, and it needs to be signed and renewed every year. So if you have any questions about that, please type them in the chat. But we'll move on to safety, security, and property. I'm not sure if you will have seen this clip already. It's 5 minutes long, and it's an oldie, but it's a goodie, even though it's old, and some of the statistics that are cited in there are old and out of date. The ideas and the suggestions are still very current. So I'm going to see if I can play this for you. I'm not that confident about getting the sound to work, but we'll see how we go. Off we go, share sound.
The New South Wales Community Languages Schools program has provided language programs since the mid-1980s. It delivers out-of-school hours language classes that support school-age students to learn and maintain their background or heritage language. About 28,000 students and 2,000 teachers are involved in the New South Wales Community Languages Schools program. Community organisations operate and administer classes in more than 50 different languages. These classes are held in over 450 locations on the weekend and after school. The New South Wales Government provides free use of mainstream school facilities. If your community language school uses mainstream school facilities, you have the responsibility to ensure the safety of all your students, as well as to protect the host school's property. This video will give you some information on how to use school property and facilities safely to help you run successful language classes. Safety. Talk to the parents at your school about dropping their children off safely. They should not double park or stop too close to the street corner. Ask them to keep driving until they find a safe place to park, and then take their children to the school. Ask parents to wait with their children until they can be looked after by the school. Try to organise teachers, parents or volunteers to assist with supervision of students. Supervise children at all times in the playground, in classrooms and during any break, including trips to the bathroom, as well as before and after classes. Make sure students and parents know which areas of the schools are out of bounds and what to do in an emergency. Also, ask the host school principal to show you where the fire extinguishers are located. When the lesson starts, don't leave children unattended in the classroom. Make sure they remain seated unless asked to move for a specific reason. Make sure they use equipment safely, including tables and chairs. Remember that the safety of the students is your responsibility. Security. If the school gives you their alarm code, make sure you keep it secure. Ask the principal of the host school or the person responsible to show you how to operate the alarm. Find out who to call if the alarm is activated and keep the number handy together with other emergency numbers. Keep the keys to the school in a safe place. Make a teacher or parent who is there every week responsible for securing the school after classes. You can use the suggested checklist to help you remember to lock classroom doors and windows, school toilets and gates, and set the alarm when you leave. If parents are waiting in the school grounds for their children, make sure they stay in a designated area and don't wander around. Don't allow unauthorised people onto the school premises. Consider restricting access to the school by closing the gates, but keeping in mind emergency access points. Property. Before the children enter the classroom, take a good look at the layout of tables, chairs, and any equipment you may have to move. If you can, take a quick photo so you can put things back after class exactly as they were. If you notice anything wrong with the classroom when you arrive, inform the mainstream school principal the next school day that your class was not responsible. Principals understand that accidents can sometimes happen, so please let them know if you or your students damage anything. They will appreciate your honesty.
Goodbye.
Teachers and students of the host school take pride in their classrooms. Look for any instructions left by the mainstream teacher regarding the use of whiteboards and other equipment. Make sure your students respect the classroom, including students' work and school equipment. Put tables and chairs back where you found them. Make sure the desks and the floor are clean when you leave, as well as the whiteboard if you've used it. Consider making up classroom rules with your students and displaying them during your lesson. If you are doing craft, consider where you should do it and how you will clean up afterwards. Children should not eat in the classrooms, so ensure meal breaks happen outside or in a designated area. Students should be responsible for putting all rubbish in the bins provided. The school pays for the electricity you use, so make sure to turn off all lights and fans in the classroom when you leave. Check that taps are turned off properly in the toilets too. Use the checklist to help you remember. By remembering these simple words, safety, security, and property, community languages schools can work in harmony with their host school to provide a safe and secure learning environment for their students. For more information or to request a checklist, send us an email.
Okay. Just having a look at the chat to see if there's any questions there. And then they mentioned the checklist. But first of all, I'll go back to my... Ooh. Sorry about this, everyone. Just getting back to the right spot. Oh no, my PowerPoint's closed. While I just get the PowerPoint back up, perhaps you could write in the chat, was there anything in that video that you saw that you thought was a good idea? Maybe something that you're not doing already that you will do, or something that you're already doing and you thought, yes, I do that and that works really well. That's really important. Could you put that in the chat for me now while I get my PowerPoint back up?
Sorry, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, from that video that you were just watching, was there something that you saw and you thought, yes, that's a great idea, I'm going to start doing that, or something that you saw and you thought, yes, that's a great idea, I already do that, and I think it's really important that schools do that? So someone mentioned the emergency contact person. Yes, I was always terrified about having the alarm and being responsible for deactivating and activating the alarm, and always have the number of the person there that I need to call if there's a problem. really important to have that number handy in case something goes wrong.
Yeah. One day it was very windy. The door just closed by itself.
Uh-huh.
So the key was in the classroom.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing that example, Caroline, of things that you just wouldn't imagine would happen. Yeah, the door blew shut from the wind. So somebody said that they would love to have that checklist. So,
sorry, Cara, I have a question regarding the toilets as well.
yeah.
Because one of the schools, they have like some celebration and stuff like that. And the principal noticed that after they finish, the toilets were a mess. So he has to come on Sunday to clean that before Monday. Yeah.
No, that's awful for the principal. That's yeah. So there was a special celebration, was there? And was there a lot of people using the toilets?
A lot of students, like even the principal and the teacher brought them the sweets and stuff like that. But some of them, went in the toilets and wrote with ink, and he has to bring like some specialized erasers and stuff to remove
Oh, no. Oh, that's really awful for that principal. It's a complex situation, isn't it? Because like I said, they are hosting your school. So it's like you're a guest in their place. And so if your people go in and mess up their place, then I think in order to nurture the relationship, it's kind of on your people to fix it up.
Also, I've noticed, Cara, which is a great thing, that the teacher in the clip have some photos of the classes. That's what I asked the teachers to do, and the principal, because some schools like runs on Friday afternoon and Saturday morning, where there is a time you come on Saturday morning and you find that it is like, in 8 hours, but you didn't do that.
Yeah, really important to get the photographic evidence if that's the case. And I know I had one school where they were being accused of messing up the kitchen garden in the school, but there were other people on the school premises using the school at the same time, and it wasn't their parents or their children who were getting into the garden. They were supervising their kids really well. So they took some photos and they had a meeting with the school and explained that they weren't responsible for the damage to the kitchen garden, and things weren't going so well. So they asked me to get involved, and then I was talking with the school as well. So you have the support of the education officers if things go sour and you don't feel like you're being heard. You can reach out to one of us and we can help you with your mediating with the host school if there's problems like that. So I'd just like to share, yesterday I showed you the website for the Community Language Schools program. This is a part of the Community Language Schools, this is the Community Use Agreement. But on the Community Language Schools, I'll just open it up here, the Community Language Schools website, you can see here is the forms. So if you click on the forms, and then down here in the forms, there's safety, security, property advice, safety, security, property checklist. So if you click on this one, you'll be able to access that checklist that they talked about in that video. And I encourage schools to show this to their host school and use this so that the host school can have confidence that The classrooms are going to be left clean. The whiteboard or the blackboard will be left clean. The desks and chairs, all of these things, really concrete steps that you can take to make sure the classroom is left as the host school teacher wants to find it. So that's that. And then somebody else was asking for a link to the video because they thought it would be good to share with parents. And yeah, that's a really great idea. So I'll put a link to the video on my website so that you can find it easily. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So here we are. There's that checklist, and I've put a screenshot on there so you can think about, is this checklist helpful for your school? Now moving on to communication, protocols and practice. We've talked about how important it is to have good communication with the host school, and it's also really important to have good communication with the Community Language Schools program within the Department of Education. Yesterday I mentioned how there's two main people at that program. There's Vera, who's the support officer, and Lyndall, who is the coordinator of the program. And it's really important that they can reach your organisation and communicate things with you. So to that end, on that database that we looked at yesterday, you need to make sure that there's 3 different people from your organisation who are listed as potential contact people. I know that when I'm trying to organise a visit to a school, I'll go to the database and I'll look for the first contact person, and sometimes I can't get through to them. And so then I go back and I might look for a person who's listed as being on the committee, maybe the chairperson, and I'll try and reach out to them. And there have been times where the public officer, reaching out for the public officer, the main contact person hasn't worked. Then I've reached out to the chairperson and that hasn't worked. And then I've reached out to a teacher who was listed on there, and that did work. So it's really important that we are able to contact different people who are listed there. So if you get a new committee, or if somebody leaves and you have a new main point of contact, it's really important that you let the Department of Education know that person has changed. So you can contact Vera with that email address there, comlang@det.newsouthwales.edu.au, and let her know if your committee's changed, or you can let one of the education officers know also, and we can update the database for you and let Vera know that that's changed. So that's one thing that's really important, because you probably know that the Community Language Program sends out lots of information about when things are due and opportunities to apply for new grants and opportunities to engage in different kinds of professional learning. So it's important that we can get those messages through to you. And to that end, it's important to have a school email account as well. You might have certain people listed as your main contact person, but it's the department's preference that instead of having a personal email address listed there, so you might have a public officer, but rather than put that person's personal email address, you have a school email address that can stay current, so that even when people come and go from the committee, that one email address remains current. The phone numbers will need to be updated, but if you have a school email address, regardless of who's running the show, that one email address remains constant, and the department can use that to send correspondence to you via email, which is their main form of correspondence with the community languages school. So have a school email account, and when you do have a school email account, make a point of checking it daily or every few days, or set up notifications if you know that you're not going to have a habit of going and looking at it regularly, so that you don't miss things as they come up. Okay, so that's about having good communication with the department. And now to incident reporting. So what is an incident? An incident could be something physical. If a student has an accident, it could be something psychosocial if there is a report of bullying or some kind of harassment. It could be something as terrible as a sexual incident. All of these, there's a whole spectrum in terms of the gravity, but even falling over and just bumping the shoulder is an incident that's worth reporting. And it's really important that the school keeps a register of incidents and that the school looks after that register indefinitely. Our insurer has asked us that our schools keep incident registers indefinitely, so that, for example, if a student falls off their chair and bumps their head and you record that incident, if that student comes back 10 years down the track and said, my back's never been the same and I'm suing your school for personal injury, it's really important that you have a record of what happened with that incident. And so that's why our insurance company has asked that our schools have an incident report register and keep that register indefinitely. So you need to have a system whereby you can store that register in an ongoing way and pass it on to subsequent committees and teachers to access and keep current. Everyone's responsible that works at the school for looking after that incident report register. I've mentioned that our insurance company requires that our schools have this register and that they keep it current and that they keep it indefinitely.
So
you could ask, Zachary?
Encompass like very hard things. So once you say indefinitely, it's not 3 years, not 5 years, not 10 years even.
That's right. Yeah, it's a legal document, so it needs to be kept for as long as the school is around, I guess. So there needs to be systems for storing these documents so that they're kept somewhere safe indefinitely. I like to keep digital copies of all of these things because I'm not so great with paper copies. So I have a Google Drive where I store all of these kinds of things. But whatever works for your organisation. So make sure that you have an incident report register for your school. Now there's over to the teaching program, but I'll just have a quick look at the chat and see if there's any new questions. So someone's asked about the statutory 7-year record, which of course applies to your minutes. The advice from my organisation's insurance company was to keep it indefinitely. So that's just the advice from our insurance company. But yeah, good point about the statutory 7-year record. And that's all that's in the chat for now. Any other questions? Does anyone want to speak up and ask a question about anything that we've covered so far? About communicating, about the safety, security, property, about recording incidents and keeping those forms safe indefinitely. Anything at all anyone would like to ask?
Hi. Cool. We use the checklist. We have to sign it or not? We have to do this sign or not?
On the checklist?
Yes.
You don't have to. It's up to your school. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We did properly. Very, very carefully have already. Yeah.
Oh, very good. Very good. And
Thank
I'm sure
you.
that that's had an impact on your relationship with your school that you are doing that.
Yeah, we understand that this situation is very important. Yeah.
Yeah. Because we have had incidents where schools just get fed up. It becomes too hard for the principal to mediate between the classroom teacher who's not happy about the community language school being there. And so the principal says, you have to find a new school, leave. And of course, it's in their power to do so. So if you do have the good fortune of finding a host school, especially one that's welcoming and lets you use the classrooms rather than the hall, it's really worth looking after that relationship and trying to keep the communication channels open and keep a good relationship, keep the principal and the classroom teacher happy with you being there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sheffy. Okay, so a teaching program. What is a teaching program? A teaching program feels for me a bit like a plan that I might make if I'm going on a trip. If I'm going on a holiday, I'm a big fan of backwards planning. So I start with where I want to end up. I might want to take a holiday to Japan post-COVID. And so I think about where do I want to go in Japan and who and what do I want to see. So I start with where I want to end up, and then I start planning backwards to work out what I need to do to get there, what resources I need to have to get there, how I can make this happen. And a teaching program's a bit like that. I like to think of, well, at the end of this, what do I want my students to be able to do with the language and the culture? What insights do I want them to have around the language and the culture? And once I have an image in my mind of where I want the students to end up, then I work backwards from there. I used to be a Japanese teacher in high school in Australia, and I was also a Japanese and an English teacher at TAFE for over 20 years, teaching adults. And at the beginning of each semester, I'd sit down and I'd think, okay, what are the things that I want the students to be able to do? And imagine it was a beginner's class. One of the things I might want them to be able to do is to introduce themselves. So to introduce themselves, what language do they need to have? There'll be vocabulary that they need, but then there'll also be some sentence structures that they need. And so I think about at the micro level, what vocabulary and what grammar do I need to teach so that the students can engage with the language in this way to communicate. The New South Wales Education Standards Authority is the government body that oversees education in New South Wales, and they have some language syllabuses. Many of our languages don't have a syllabus developed by NESA, but they do have a framework which is like a generic syllabus that any language teacher could look at to get some ideas around how to plan what they want to teach. And these syllabuses are based on a lot of research around what's the most effective way to teach language. And increasingly, we're moving towards teaching language in a way that the language is embedded in a concept. So we might start with a concept like healthy eating, and it's not so much linked to doing particular things, but engaging with language around an idea or a concept. And this is a really beautiful way to approach language teaching in a community language schools context, because often our students in community language schools have access to more complex language already because many of them are using the language at home. And then also they're more aware of the cultural concepts around the language and the culture related to these concepts. So when you're looking at something like healthy eating, there's an opportunity to talk with students about what does healthy eating look like in your home. If you get to go to your grandparents' home, if your grandparents are still in the heritage country, what does healthy eating look like there? What does healthy eating look like when you go to a friend's house from in your neighbourhood? And so when you approach language learning in that way, we're also inviting in these cross-curricular priorities that were developed by the Australian Council for Educational Research. Things like interculturalism and social awareness. It becomes much more than learning to speak, listen, read and write, and much more around using language for connection and communication, and using language to understand culture and interculturalism, our cultural differences and how we can work with these, building empathy, all of those really rich and kind of almost intangible aspects of engaging with education. So a teaching program might include starting with concepts that allow us to engage with the students around those other bigger ideas. Getting back to starting with teaching self-introductions, I might look at some body language around self-introductions and what the body language in different cultures teaches us about the values of those people. Things like touching or not touching, space, those kinds of ideas. What does that tell us about these different cultures and the way that they express their values? Who writes the teaching program? I would like to think that the teachers write the teaching program, but of course every school's different. You may have somebody in your school who's like a mentor and a guide for volunteer teachers who have less experience with teaching, and perhaps that mentor directs the teaching programs that are passed on to everybody that's teaching in the school. So it could look different in different schools. Do you use a textbook? Textbooks, I really understand why somebody would want to use a textbook, especially somebody who's not trained as a language teacher, because it requires minimal preparation and it's like scaffolding. It's like something safe to hang on to guide you through the way that you teach. So yeah, textbooks I think are great. And as you get more confident, and perhaps after doing some professional learning with me or Alex or Enya, and you get some strategies for how to develop a teaching program that is more conceptual and gives you opportunities to be a little bit more active and maybe fluid and responsive to where different students in the class are at, maybe then you can bring the textbook in as like something extra, as a tool for doing something bigger. Rather than just turning up and working systematically through the textbook, you can combine it with games and surveys and different projects. But the textbook can be a really wonderful source of particularly teaching grammar, teaching vocabulary. And sometimes you might start with the textbook and use that to develop your teaching program. So perhaps following the themes in the textbook, but then just coming to the textbook now and then and making your program bigger than what's just in the textbook. So as I mentioned, Alex and Enya and I can provide workshops around programming. So please encourage your teachers to attend one of those if you see one coming up. Units of work. So when we do programming, we'll start with the bigger picture. Like I said, for example, when I'm planning a trip, I'll start with where I want to go, the country, the cities, and then the unit of work will be more like the details. So with my teaching program, I might start with, okay, in term 1, I'm going to do healthy eating, and I write a scope and sequence, and I'll say that I'm doing healthy eating and some just very general ideas around some things that might be in that topic or in that concept. And then I'll write a unit of work which will then look at, okay, how am I going to introduce the vocabulary? How am I going to introduce the grammar that they need to be able to do these things? And what resources will I use to do those things? So the unit of work is like a more detailed plan of how I'm actually going to turn up and teach lesson by lesson, the content of my whole term's activity. So it might be a number of units of work per term. And then a lesson plan is what you do each lesson. So you can see there's kind of like 3 levels. There's the scope and sequence, there's the unit of work, and then there's a lesson plan for each lesson. So that's a little bit about a teaching program. I said a lot there. I'll just check how I'm going for time. Yep, I'm doing all right.
Can we add something regarding the lesson plans of the programs?
Yeah, sure, Zachariah. You'd like to say something about lesson plans, did you say?
What we do, like every semester or every term, actually, we have like 1 day of SD to look at the past, what we have done, for example, in term 2, and to annotate or to see the annotation of the teachers on the programs and the lesson plans themselves. So that will give us insights for next year programming. And maybe, for example, if we say we will reach like unit 3, lesson 5, and we didn't reach, so we can restructure our programming or our lesson plans for term 3.
Thank you for sharing that, Zachariah. Yeah, it's a lovely thing if you can come together to have a planning day. And I love what you said about building on what you've done. So when you come together at that time, you reflect on what you've covered, and perhaps that's an opportunity to reflect on what worked and what didn't work, or what was really engaging for the students and what was a bit of a flop, and then make decisions about what you might reuse or what you might do differently moving forward. It's so important to monitor how you're going and to reflect on what works and what doesn't work.
Also, I add that what program we wrote is not like a book that we need to abide with every time. So if a teacher finds on some day that the strategy that is put in the program or the lesson plan also being prepared does not suit the student that day, she has the freedom to change it and write on the annotation, yes, I changed it that day, but that not like a must to be changed for next year. For particular incident that happens, I have to redo this strategy or choose another strategy of teaching. Like, for example, instead of using the PowerPoint, no, I use team teaching for that day. I think the students need like a little bit of freedom or to move around, because it seems like that day they are having some issues. So I modified the strategy, I amended it, and I use it for that particular lesson on that particular day. But if that's the case, that no, the strategy that I use today, I think that is the best strategy to be used ever, then for the next year programming, that needs to be reconsidered.
Yeah. And how do you keep track of this? Do you have a learning management system, or do you have paper?
We talked to Alex regarding attitude, and in the coming SD, where I will gather the teachers, so Alex will come and have introduce the attitude for them. And but however, meantime, what we do, like I monitor and I ask the principals of the school to collect, because that's a working document that they have, like the scope and sequence or the programming, and they annotate every week on it. And every like 2 or 3 weeks, I collect these annotation and see if any change that necessitate me to interfere, or no, we wait till the end of the term where the SD and we can have the say then.
Yeah, thank you, Zachariah. Yeah, it's really important to have a system for keeping track of these reflections and the growing body of work that the teachers develop. When I was working in the high school most recently, which was about 3 years ago, I was in a Steiner school. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Rudolf Steiner is a Waldorf system of education that comes out of Germany, and it's very much based around colour and craft and beauty and the spirit of the child. And in the primary school, they had no technology at all in the school. And the methods for recording the teaching programs and capturing those reflections, like Zachariah was talking about, the annotations, the reflections of the teachers, were like something from 150 years ago. It was all just on paper, and they were all stored in a filing cabinet, and things got lost, but it kind of worked. I mean, it was something, it was a system. But now they've even this school has moved towards using a learning management system. So, and digitizing things is my preference, even if it just means scanning or taking a photo and putting it in a file in a Google Drive, rather than having a learning management system. But you need to have some form of capturing that growing body of work and the teacher's reflections on what works and what doesn't work, so that we're not constantly reinventing the wheel, which is something that happens a lot. And yesterday I mentioned the Sydney Institute for Community Languages Education at Sydney University, and they have been undertaking a big project that some of you might be aware of creating a hub where teachers from all different languages can share resources that they make. And that is still alive. You can submit resources that you make that are not bound by copyright to be uploaded and shared in this database. And I'll send you a link when I send a follow-up email after this, so that you can go in and have a look at the resources that are there, and you can incorporate those into your programming, into your units of work and your lesson plans. Does anyone have anything else that they'd like to ask, or any comments that they'd like to make? We're nearly at the end of our time together. Here's a recap of the people in the program. I didn't mention Sally yesterday. So Sally is actually the director of the Community Languages program, and also a part of her responsibility is the international programs for student support and specialist programs. So Sally's like at the top of our program within the Department of Education. And then there's Lyndall, who is the program coordinator, who's really our point of contact if we have anything that we really need support or advice around. Lyndall is one person that you can contact. Then there's Vera, who's the support officer. And then the 3 education officers, me, Alex, and Enya. And then we have Enam, who is a project officer who's working at the department for a couple of days a week. This is just a screenshot that I wanted to show you of some of the important dates for different things that happen in the Community Languages Schools program. Different things that I've talked about today, yesterday and today, the dates when they happen. And you can see that it's spread right through the year, that there's different things happening, which is why it's so important that we have that current email address so that we can contact you and remind you that all of these things are happening. We don't expect you to remember. We'll let you know when these dates come up. So make sure we've got a current email address that is checked regularly so we can remind you about these things. So here is a link. If you're one of the new schools that had to attend this induction program, it's really important that you fill out this form so that we have a record that you were here. Thank you for your attendance, everyone, and best wishes for the fantastic work that you are doing. Just going to stop this share, and I'll put the link to that Google form in the chat so that you can access it.
Cara, sorry, I asked a question yesterday regarding the language ambassador.
And I emailed and I emailed Lyndall and I didn't get a response.
Okay.
So
No
I'll
worries.
get back to you, Zachariah, or you can email Lyndall yourself. I'm so sorry about that.
No.
Yeah,
No
so,
worries. Also, thank you.
and any last minute questions from anybody? I wanted to,
Hi, the link you shared
yes.
can't have the form. It says you need permission.
Oh, damn. Okay, I'll update that in a sec. Sorry, thank you for letting me know.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to make a special shout out to Sky, Zoe and Dana from Walhallow Public School. Very special welcome to you. Are you there? They put in
Yes, we are.
Hey, would you tell us a little bit about your school?
Hi, sure. We are a tiny rural remote school of 22 students who all identify as Aboriginal. And Dana and myself, I'm Zoe, share the role as Aboriginal Education Officer at the moment because I'm currently on part-time maternity leave.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
We are so excited to have an Indigenous language school joining our program, which is why I wanted to give a special warm welcome to you all. And
thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your language?
So I have been at Walhallow for 7 years and learnt from there. So we teach the Gamilaroi language and we are the traditional owners of the Gamilaroi, Kamilaroi or Gomeroi people. And our language is just currently evolving leaps and bounds as more and more gets learnt. And we just think it's important to share with the students as most of us didn't get to do it when we were younger.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I had a look at the teaching program that you submitted with your application.
Yeah.
And I loved the work that you're doing around connection to country as a part of the language learning.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, really beautiful. So it's a special welcome to you and your school. And
thank you.
I hope that we can support you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to fix up that form now so that you can register your attendance using that form. And again, if ever you need any support with anything, don't hesitate to reach out to Alex or Enya or to me. We're very happy to help you. We think that the work that you're doing is so important and so meaningful, and we're really wanting to give you any help that you need to keep going with strengthening cultural and linguistic diversity in Australia.
Thank you.
So I wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tara.
Thank you very much.
You